enrichment, enlightenment, transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you, everyone who is tuning in, wherever you are. Debbie, if you are listening, we would love to hear your insight, your questions, and anyone. Feel free to let us know if you're listening and ask questions via the chat box. And a thank you to Nissan Communications for broadcasting this class all over the world. Well, we're not quite done with the laws and the building of the tabernacle just yet. Another 2 weeks. So we're discussing it yet again, this time with a twist. And I'll begin with a little story. Story is told of this CEO of this big organization that takes a trip to South America and is on a little fishing island in Brazil, and is vacationing, and he's on his yacht, and he sees this cute little Brazilian fisherman who is really, really talented and catches a few huge fish. And then it's like noontime, and the fellow calls it a day and goes back to port. And he tells him, "You're so talented, why are you stopping today?" And he says, "This is what I need for today." And he says, "Work a little bit harder." He goes, "Nah, this is fine." He goes, "What do you do the rest of the day?" He goes, "I go home and have a little siesta, a little that. Then I am home and my kids come home from school, and at night me and my buddies take out the guitar and we drink and we dance the night away." And he turns to him and he says, "That's nice and all, but just imagine if this is what you caught in a few hours, what you could do if you put in more work." He's like, "What would happen?" Because you would probably get to the point where you would have so many fish, you would start a company, and you would have to employ numerous other people. He goes, and then you would move to Sao Paulo, and you would establish the corporate headquarters over there, and you would be able to manage everything from afar. And then, he goes, then you would probably be able to retire early. And then you'd be able to move to a little island somewhere and just work as little as you want and be able to spend time with your grandkids and dance the night away with your guitar. So it's a cute story that's given, and Judaism has a tension. On one hand, we are into work, not like that's fishermen. On the other hand, we're not into work for no reason. And I think that's what makes it so hard to pinpoint, where we do work, but there's a reason. There's a Shabbat. And when the Torah discusses the building of the sanctuary, we're on page 134. Just to give you the backdrop here, we had two portions in which we discussed the building of the sanctuary. Last week, we had an intermission, and we discussed the golden calf. Whoever was at synagogue Shabbat, we discussed that in great length, what that was about. When does God finally forgive the Jewish people? On which day? Which day of the calendar?
Well, that's the Shabbat.
No. What day of the calendar does God finally say you are forgiven for the golden calf? God says, "Vayomer Adonai, salachti kitbarecha." You are forgiven. It's Yom Kippur. That's the original Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur didn't just, that's when it began.
How long was that in the calendar? I don't know the calendar.
So the Shavuot is when we got the Torah. Let's just go through the calendar. We got the Torah on the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot is 49 days after Passover.
So it took a little while.
Then we got the Torah. Then Moses went up for how many days? 40 days and 40 nights.
Oh.
That takes us to early summer. Early summer, he comes down and he breaks the tablets. Today, that's a minor fast day, by the way, in the Jewish calendar, that day. Then Moshe asks for forgiveness, and the Jews get like a minor forgiveness. All right, I won't destroy you guys. Moshe said, "I want more than that." Yeah, Moshe wants more than that, and he pleads again. And then following that, there's another set of 40 days and 40 nights. and he comes down with the second tablets, and that's when he's fully forgiven. When does he come down with the second tablets? Yom Kippur. So really, this whole stretch takes us from Passover all the way through the summer. Yeah. But it's what I find neat about that is, like, we know what days it happens. It's so cool. That tradition is, so established that we know when these things happen, and he finally comes down Yom Kippur. Then they have a team huddle the next day. And the Torah uses a very interesting word, vayakel. That's the name of this week's parsha, vayakel. What does the word kehila mean in Hebrew? Kehila. There's a temple in, where is it, Durham or Chapel Hill? That's called the Chapel Hill. Kehila means congregation.
Okay.
That's what the word means. Vayakel is the verb. It means, and he congregated. He congregates the Jewish people together. And it's an odd word because throughout the Torah, Moshe is telling the Jews things. But here it says he congregates them together. There's got to be a special reason. What is the special reason? Oral tradition tells us it's the day after Yom Kippur. The Jews are forgiven, and they have a team huddle. And what is the team huddle about, folks? I know you built the golden calf. You're forgiven. Now I want you to throw your energy into another kind of construction, and that is the tabernacle. So that's the time frame over here.
Oh, and it's handy you gathered all the gold in one spot. We'll need that soon.
Exactly. Yeah, all the gold that you used, at least the women didn't give their gold, as we discussed last week. None of the women participated in the golden calf. Where's the keep? Oh, they're there. And they still had the gold. They donated. So here is the way the Parsha begins. Pam, why don't you begin page 134? And we can share books if we don't have enough. Thank you.
Moses called the whole community of the children of Israel to assemble, and he said to them, "These are the things that God commanded to make. 6 days' work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have sanctity, a day of complete rest to God. Whoever performs work thereon on this day shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwelling places on Shabbat day." And Moses spoke to the entire community of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the word that God has commanded to say. Take from yourselves an offering for God. Every generous-hearted person shall bring it, namely God's offering.
Gold, silver, copper, clothing, materials. And from that point until the end of the Parsha is all about, once again, the building of the tabernacle. But this is what's odd. The Parsha should just begin. Moshe gets everyone together to tell them about the building of the tabernacle. There's 2 sentences beforehand. What does he tell them? Folks, remember that Shabbat day? We got to do the Shabbat. And then he tells them about the next thing, which takes the rest of the Torah portion, and that is the building of the tabernacle. What is Shabbat doing here? We already had Shabbat. We had Shabbat in the 10 Commandments. We had Shabbat another time. Why is Shabbat sandwiched here? It doesn't seem important to the story at all. At all. And the entire rest of the portion is about the building of the Mishkan. It seems odd, and that is enough to get everyone's attention. And many of you may know there's a juxtaposition here between Shabbat and building of the Mishkan. This is very important in Jewish law for 2 reasons. There are 2 reasons why it's important. First of all, this is not the only time in Jewish law we have a juxtaposition. Brian, 1C. Do 1C and then 1B. Go out of order here.
You shall observe my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am God.
This is from much later in Torah. But what do we see there? That there is a juxtaposition. Observe Shabbat and revere the sanctuary. Oh, that was my phone?
No, it was just getting your phone out of the way.
Paperweight.
So there's another time in Torah where we see a juxtaposition between the 2. What is the juxtaposition? So there are 2 reasons for the juxtaposition. In the oral Torah says the Torah is like a code. Whenever something is written, it's there for a reason. Why is Shabbat there right next to the building of the Mishkan? There's got to be a code. There's a hidden reason. What is it as the hidden reason? 1B. Do 1B as well.
Moses presented the instruction to keep Shabbat before the commandment to construct the Mishkan, to express that the work of the Mishkan does not supersede Shabbat.
So you would think this is such an important project. We're building the house of God. We're doing something to atone for the golden calf. You might think that they should work on it 7 days a week. So Moshe starts off, hey guys, another reminder, there's a Shabbat, and no matter how good the project is, you can't build it on Shabbat. And one day, God willing, when we're building our own new shul over here, we'll have a chance to observe this law, that even when you are building a house of God, you still don't do it on the Shabbat, which is interesting, yeah.
So is this the basis of the rules now of prohibited activities on Shabbat, or the activities of building of the temple?
Correct, and that's text 2. Once you said it, Brian, do text 2 as well.
Again, the sages sat and pondered. This that the Mishnah states. The principal categories of labor are 40 less 1. To what do they correspond? Rabbi Chana ben Harma told them they correspond to the labors of the construction of the tabernacle.
How do we know which work is not allowed on Shabbat? The Torah just says don't do work, and then it continues with one. Remember, it mentioned one thing, fire. It mentions fire,
right.
But it doesn't define work. So here you need the oral tradition, and the oral tradition tells us any activity that was necessary for building the Mishkan, those are the types of things that are not allowed to do on Shabbat. But this is the source for it. So it's interesting. I mean, the source of it is the Talmud. The Talmud mentions there's great, great oral traditions that were passed down from Moses. But every oral tradition is usually alluded to somewhere in the actual written text. Where in the written text is this alluded here? So when they built the tabernacle, there's a whole list of jobs that they did. And I want to divide it into 3. There were jobs that had to do with food. There were jobs that had to do with building, construction, and there were jobs that had to do with sewing. Okay? What did they sew? What was the sewing necessary for? The clothing of the priests. There's great details how. So there's a whole section of the laws that have to do with spinning and sewing and more than that, shearing, anything from beginning to end of the clothing process. Beginning and end of the building process. You can't build on Shabbat. You can't
schlepping.
So this is what's interesting. Then we get into the why schlepping isn't. Let's save that for And then there is anything to do with food, and the food begins with planting and ends with cooking. A lot of things are in between that, planting and there's something before planting. What is it?
Preparing the field.
Plowing. Plowing is actually the first. Plowing, then planting, and then harvesting, and then threshing. There's a whole process how to go from to bread, concluding with baking. So these are what's called the 39 activities on Shabbat. So we're not going to focus so much on that today. What we're going to focus on today is the other juxtaposition, which is you can't build the sanctuary on Shabbat. Marty, you were going to ask something. Oh, no? Yeah.
Something. I'm just curious how big the workforce was. How many people, did they know how many people were there?
A lot. It was men and women, actually. The Torah specifically says that the women volunteered even more than the men, again, in this week's Parsha. We don't have numbers. We don't have numbers. I would imagine that the morale of the Jews following the tragedy of the golden calf was ripe for everyone to get involved. People wanted to throw themselves into something positive.
So how many were there in the desert?
There were lots. There was absolutely lots. We know there were more. Yeah, more than that. So it could have been done very fast. I think I've mentioned this before, that while they were building the Mishkan, was one of the few times throughout their entire traveling in the desert that there was no kvetching and no complaining, no sins, which is it's very, very interesting.
But that's why Noah was quick. It was
correct. Oh, yeah. But what I find actually interesting about this is parenthetical. I think it's so powerful. I gave shared this with not important.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Anne in the chat is asking, what about doctors and nurses? Can they work on Shabbat?
Okay, so that is so we know that life-saving work is allowed to be done on Shabbat. However, it's not so simple in Jewish law. In Jewish law, if someone is in an emergency, you're allowed to save a life on Shabbat. That is still different than going to work on Shabbat. So it's a more detailed question. The short answer is if someone's life's in danger, yes, you are allowed to. So you think about even Shabbat observant people in Israel in the military, think about that. Think about doctors and nurses, think about other law enforcement, but it's a complicated subject. And I know about it well. My father is a physician, and I grew up with him occasionally working on Shabbat for certain reasons. So it's a longer subject, a very good question. Where were we?
You were talking about the work.
Oh, no, I was saying something very interesting, that they didn't fetch the entire time while they're in the desert, which actually shows us something very profound. Are we more affected, this is parenthetical, by things that happen to us or things that we do? The Jews had so many miracles happen to them, okay? The sea and Sinai and they witnessed miracles. And yet, when you're just the recipient of something happening to you, that wasn't enough to internally transform them. When they themselves gave, built, spun, worked, they were further changed by that. It's interesting thought. When something is given to you, not always does it internally change you, but when you work for something.
I guess, but after watching the plagues in Egypt,
yeah,
watching the sea part, following the visual manifestation of God through the desert,
yeah,
I would be profoundly moved.
You're right. I just find it interesting how this affected them more than that. That's all.
Uh-huh.
And there's something about, and it's a good lesson in leadership and in anything, just witnessing, being the recipient. You need people to give. You need not just give. You need people to all work together towards something, and that is when you see people change the most, rather than just attending. It's an interesting lesson there, but that's parenthetical. Yes.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, what do we see here? A connection between Mishkan, I'll use the Hebrew, the sanctuary, and Shabbat. Very strong connection. The Torah puts them together. The laws are the same. Because if you think about it, they're really the same thing. One is a sanctuary in time, and one is a sanctuary in place. Okay? What Shabbat is to time, the sanctuary was to place. I don't think about it that way, but that's important. And in fact, in Jewish mysticism, it writes that the parameters of the world, when God made the world, the first big creations were time and space.
Space was the separation of the land and the sea.
So time and space are actually the parameters of the world. Let's do this text from the Tanya, mystical work, Hal, text 3.
The term world can be applied solely to that which possesses the dimension of space and time. Space referring to east, west, north, and south, upward and downward, and time to past, present, and future.
And that's why we have difficulties relating to anything, I do, that goes beyond time and space. We have a hard time with that, right? So, I was just giving a class earlier today, and one of the questions was about freedom of choice. It's the age-old question: how do we have freedom of choice if God knows what we're going to do? You ever hear that one?
We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Oh, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And one of the challenges with the question is, I can't spill the beans. A few people in the class are taking the course. But why are we so bothered by that? We're trying to understand a reality of where God doesn't have past, present, and future. And our minds can only think when there's past, present, and future, because we are creations. So the parameters of creation are time and space. Each one has a sanctuary. The sanctuary of time is Shabbat, and the sanctuary of place is going to be the Mishkan. Yes?
And what's interesting, it's all in the first word.
You're going to enlighten us, Al?
Because
Thank you.
You could say it's with beginning. What is the thing that starts? Time is with beginning.
Correct.
And then you switch the letters around, and it's create 6.
Correct. And that's going to be the space.
The space.
Yeah. So those were the first creations, the potential for time and the potential for space. Without that, you don't have the world. So there's another similarity between both, and that is both are sanctuaries and both have both positive and negative dimensions of each. Okay? In the sanctuary, yes, there was a lot of stuff that was done there. There was also a lot of stuff that was not allowed to be done there. For instance, if people were spiritually impure, They were not allowed to. They weren't that. Oh, you're thinking of the guys that ran in without permission to the Holy of Holies. You need authorization to be there.
Aaron's sons, yeah.
Correct. Aaron's sons. It wasn't free entry for everyone. There was certainly rules. People that were impure, spiritually impure, couldn't go there. There were sections where you weren't allowed to go by unless you were a Kohen, or unless you had business to do. What would a business have been in those days? Why would you have been? You were bringing an offering. So a woman just gave birth, she brought an offering. Someone did a sin, they brought an offering. But you were there because you had business to do. It wasn't a place that people just hung around. Exactly. There were a lot of laws in place, and believe it or not, there were guards. Who were the guards? Levites. Levites served as guards actually around it. And there was a positive and a negative dimension of it. There was that which you're supposed to do. But anything holy has to have its fences around it to make sure it doesn't become too casual. It can't be a coffee shop. It wasn't supposed to be a coffee shop. Okay. And we see the same thing about Shabbat. It has positive and negative. Text 4a, Virgil, do you want to read? 137 from the Ten Commandments.
Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it.
That's from the Ten Commandments the first time around. The second time we have the Ten Commandments, when Moses repeats it, what does he say? Do the next text, 4b.
Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it.
I don't like the translation. The first time it's Zachor. What does Zachor mean? Remember. The second time it's Shamor. Shamor means, it says keep. It's weak. Guard.
Yeah.
If anyone here knows that in a Jewish, if anyone here knows there's something called Shmira, someone passes away, you protect, you stay close to the body. The body should never be left alone. That is called being a shomer, or the noun is Shmira. What are you doing? You're guarding. It shouldn't be alone. So that's the word Shamor means. So the first time the Ten Commandments, Shamor.
I was thinking of the Shamish candle.
Shamish, that has almost one letter difference. One letter difference. The first time the Ten Commandments, it says, remember the Shabbat. The next time it says protect, guard. Well, which one is it? Obviously the answer is both. The question is, which one did the Jews hear when they got the Ten Commandments? Because the Torah records it twice, but the answer is both. Where do we mention this? That they heard both? So one of the famous Jewish prayers that people sing on Friday night, for those that have ever attended Friday night services, is the Lecha Dodi. The Lecha Dodi begins, after you say Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela, the first stanza begins, and now for Shamor, V'zachor, B'dibur, Echad. Shamor, V'zachor, B'dibur, Echad.
So keep and remember.
Were said B'dibur Echad at one time. That's what the words mean. Shamor v'zachor, the Shamor of Shabbat and the Zachor of Shabbat were said at once. The Jews heard both at the same time. That's interesting. So, and I want to skip text 5b. You know what? Because a few people here were taking the JLI, and if you remember, we had that controversial question a few weeks ago. We're going off subject today about women being obligated in certain positive time-bound mitzvot. And you could say, well, is Shabbat a positive time-bound mitzvah?
Certainly.
Sir. So maybe women shouldn't be obligated in Shabbat, based upon what we discussed last week in the JLI. Well, what's the answer? The positive and the negative of Shabbat are one. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. And are women obligated in the negative of Shabbat?
Yeah.
Yes, so they're obligated in the positive as well. Because the Jews heard both as one. This is parenthetical, but that is text 5. Let's go back to the subject here. The subject here is that both the sanctuary and Shabbat have a positive side of it and the negative side of it. For a day to truly be holy, you have to abstain. You have to stop from doing work. Then you set the stage to be able to instill it with holiness. For a place to be holy, certain activities have to be out of bounds there. Then you are able to make it holy. And that is what text 6 says about Shabbat, that Shabbat is not just the day we're not supposed to work, but we're supposed to mentally as well, text 6, Marty?
regarding Shabbat, the verse states, and you honor it by not doing your wanted ways, by not pursuing your affairs, and speaking words. And speaking words implies that the speech of Shabbat should not be like the speech of the week. Thus, a person should not say, I will do a certain thing forbidden on Shabbat tomorrow, or purchase certain merchandise tomorrow.
So in shul, in synagogue, you shouldn't have people schmoozing about the sale that they're going to buy even tomorrow. Meaning, I wish every synagogue people did this. But not only are you not supposed to go shopping on Shabbat, but you shouldn't be discussing mundane activities on Shabbat, because it is an island. It is supposed to be a sanctuary. Sanctuary has the holy rituals that you do, but also the things that you abstain from. So far what have we established? Shabbat equals Mishkan. One is in time, one is in place. Each one has a Zachor and a Shamor component to it. There's abstaining from those things that get in the way, and then there's those things that introduce holiness to it. Okay. Everyone with me so far? Good. Let's go further, page 140. And I'm going to paraphrase this section pretty fast because we have discussed this before. The whole notion of a sanctuary is very, very odd. Why does God need a place to live? Doesn't God want to live in the whole world? What does it mean we build a home for God? What does that mean? What does it mean? And it's not just me asking the question. King Solomon, before he builds the temple, let's do the first text 7. Janet, do you mind reading text 7?
But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you, much less this temple that I have.
So after King Solomon builds this thing, he's like, what am I doing? How can a physical place be correct? What, God needs it? So we've discussed this answer before. Anyone want to articulate it? What is a temple for God about? Or better yet, does a sanctuary for God mean that God lives here and not elsewhere?
Yeah, let's give the people a chance to
To
have
what?
something to
More tangible?
more tangible, so they won't build another golden calf.
Okay. Keep them out of trouble.
Yeah.
So the sanctuary, you're saying, is a place of revealed holiness in order that they can be holy at home. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And I also want to...
As a place for a congregation, people to come together and pray together.
And,
get people
correct.
together.
In order that later they should be able to do what's right as individuals as well. Okay? What we're saying here is it was never just about the sanctuary. It was the sanctuary in order that later you can bring it home. I asked this question on Shabbat. If I ask what is holier, the sanctuary or a home, I say the word holier. What is the answer? The sanctuary. There are laws in Judaism about what is there are certain activities you're not supposed to do. There's laws about if something is used for a holy thing, you're not supposed to sell it for a mundane use afterwards. I don't know if you know that, like an ark. If you have an ark that's used to hold Torah scrolls, and then that synagogue goes out of business, you can't sell the ark on eBay. You know that? No, you can't. Once it has been used for holiness, it can't be downgraded afterward. There are laws. So if I ask what is holier, the answer is clear. If, however, I reworded the question and asked what is more important, that's a different question. What's the answer to that? In a sense, the home. But the only way we know what to do at home, the way we can be guided, is when we have a place that we get the inspiration from. Okay. So there is these two sides here. That it is not about the sanctuary, it is about every day. But there needs to be a sanctuary to do it. The same thing, yeah, what are you going to say?
I also look at it, it takes a lot of work to build that sanctuary.
Correct.
And what you're trying to do is build a home for God. When you do that to yourself, when you put in the work, it takes work
then
to build a sanctuary where you can then have a different type of relationship than just a material relationship with God. And there are a huge amount of rules of work to create that.
Correct. And this is what's interesting. Remember I told you beforehand about the 3 categories of work necessary? What were the 3 categories again?
Food,
Yeah, there's food stuff.
sewing.
And cooking.
Right, so it's pretty much food, shelter, and clothing. Right? Because I said there was the construction of the building is category A,
Shelter.
which is shelter. There was the preparation of food, and there was the sewing of the garments. So what was it all about? Food, shelter, and garments. So what is it? So those things which we normally look at as very materialistic, all of a sudden become what? Holy when you go to the temple. The goal is that later in your own life, food is not only materialistic, it can be holy, and shelter can be used for holiness, and clothing can be used for holiness. So the reason why the 39 activities of have to do with the mundane is because the goal was that they can get their inspiration from the mundane afterwards.
One question, is
Sure.
that the reason why we say prayers on so many things? Because we're trying to make food holy by saying a prayer?
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, we're trying to uplift the mundane. But what place did that the best? That was the Mishkan. That was the Mishkan. So here is the question. So we see how that's the Mishkan. We see how Shabbat is the same idea. What do we do once a week? We stop and we try to get the holiness in ourselves that we can later engage with the world the rest of the week and not be trapped by the mundane, but to uplift the mundane. So here's my only question then. Why couldn't they build the Mishkan on Shabbat? If the Mishkan represents this holiness, and the food, clothing, and shelter of the Mishkan were of a holy type, then they should be able to build the Mishkan on Shabbat also, because they're not going to get,
Yeah, but it's sort of a slippery slope. If you allow it there, what else? What do you make the...
Well, and also, if we back up to Genesis 1, God took a break on Shabbat from fairly important work.
Good.
Fairly important.
Fairly important work.
So maybe you should too.
So this is the idea. No matter how holy the pursuit, every now and then, and I know this myself, what do you got to do? You got to stop and ask yourself the question, what? No matter how holy the pursuit, every now and then you stop and you ask the three-letter question, and that is, why am I doing this? Right, that's what Shabbat is supposed to be throughout the week. We work and we're running, and then once we wait, why am I doing this? Why am I working? Why am I? And then I reflect on what's most important. Then I re-engage throughout the week. So the Mishkan, guess what? It was a very holy work, but I could imagine getting so caught up into the what, they too could forget the why. And it's that way in our life as well. We can be doing something. Sometimes we can get caught up in something very holy, or at least we think so. And sometimes we forget why we're doing it, and all of a sudden we're fighting with someone else about it. Or so we get caught up in some petty component of it that if we would only realize why, it's like, imagine fighting about a mitzvah project. It happens all the time in communities. And well, the whole reason you're doing this is to bring, how could you be fighting about it, right? But that is what happens. We get caught up into the what, we forget the why. So from the beginning, God says, guess what? Even when building the ultimate sanctuary in place, you also need to have the why as well. And that is what Shabbat is. Shabbat really is a two-way road. It is when we wind down after the week, that's what people speak about a lot. But just as important is when we shift focus that now I can re-engage the following week. Meaning, is Shabbat the last day of the week or the first day of the week?
Last thing.
Yeah. In many areas of it is the last day. In some areas of Jewish law, it seemed to be like before. I'll give you an example. Before someone has a yard site, the Shabbat before is very, very important. It says, you can say Kaddish the Shabbat before. You're supposed to get called to the Torah the Shabbat before. It's like Shabbat, it says blesses the entire week. Have you heard that expression? Shabbat is the source of blessing for which week? The upcoming week. So you're right. In time, Shabbat is the last day of the week. In many areas of Jewish law, Shabbat is the source of blessing for the following week.
Well, it's preparation for the next week.
That's what it is. And that's what we have over here. So we have, we need this island in time, and it makes perfect sense now why the Torah puts both sanctuaries together. That's what is a sanctuary? A place where you can regain focus on what you're doing the rest of the week. What is Shabbat? A day you can regain focus. So it's both a rest from the previous week as well as a preparation for the rest of the week. And that really is going back to the little story I said at the beginning about the Brazilian CEO. Judaism takes an in-between stage. Who's right in the story? Is it the villager or is it the CEO?
The CEO seemed pretty happy.
Yeah, the CEO. Yeah. Well, I mean, but Judaism also says you can't always spin for no reason. We're supposed to be working. The same way it says on the seventh day you should rest, it also says 6 days a week you should work. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but how do you square that with the Haredi then, with the 6 days of work? Is it because they're saying their work is study and that's their work, or how do they explain that?
You're saying a particular group. I don't want to, like, Haredi is a very...
A particular group in Israel where, right, they spend all day studying, and there's tens of thousands of them, and they say, now, why is that?
So there was always a very, there was always a very, you know what, I don't want to say always. I don't want to say always. There was often a small sector of the society who were the Shabbat amongst the people. All right, we mentioned time and space.
Right.
What did we let?
They were time and space. Huh?
They were the Shabbat in space in the sense of people that throughout the week could inspire people why they're doing what they're doing. They're teaching Torah. It was a small, it was never a large group of people.
Right.
It was a small group of people, and here more so. They were doing what they were doing because other people appreciated what they were doing.
Right.
And it was a two-way road. The same way Shabbat has to affect the rest of the week, and the rest of the week has to affect Shabbat.
Right.
Those people have to affect the rest of the people, and the rest of the people have to rub off on those people.
Right.
If there's a split, the system doesn't work. The same way if there's a split in our world, that Shabbat is when I become Jewish, right? That's when I do my Jewish stuff, but it doesn't spill over into the rest of the week. That's problematic. And I would say the same thing here, Marty. The fact that there has to, for it, the system to work, there has to be a large appreciation. I heard someone say that one of the reasons they do this, I just want to let you know, one of the reasons is they felt that following the Holocaust,
Right.
a large group of Jewish people had to be dedicated to Torah learning to rebuild Jewish scholarship, to rebuild Torah learning. And the question would then be, thank God today there are more people learning Torah than, at what point does that stop?
But that's what Ben Gurion, when he set up the Constitution, but I think at that time they set it up for 40 people to be the people of the prayer, and now it's tens of thousands.
Correct,
So.
correct. And that was never seen to be the avodah, the service of the regular person.
Right.
The regular person was 6 days a week, you should work, and on Shabbat you should rest. That was,
But how did then these people that you might say are
they would say we are
Orthodox.
the Shabbat of the people, The question is there that ratio, how would they explain the ratio? And that would be a question to ask, but that would be the understanding.
Okay.
But I think that what you ask is very relevant to today's class, and we're gonna hold it here. And that is, how do you know if you have a good Shabbat if it spills into the rest of the week? That is the definition of Shabbat, because it was never about the sanctuary alone. The rest of the week, it was never about Shabbat alone, and so the CEO is doing holy work if it's for a purpose, and we're here to do work, heavy work, but we need a Shabbat. Judaism champions the businessman and the fisherman, the work ethic, and the pursuit of meaning, purpose, and spiritual connection, and this is the balance of Shabbat and the rest of the week. And here's the last piece, and we skipped some of these last texts. But if I ask you how many days is Shabbat a week, you would say 1. However, if Shabbat was really powerful, we always remain throughout the week with a touch of Shabbat. And what that means, throughout the week, we realize why we're doing what we're doing. Okay?
So
And
Friday,
if-
at least
Yeah, exactly. We're running out of...
Right.
And when you do that, as when you engage in a task, you are there, but you're not totally swept up in it. Why? Because you are controlling it. It is not controlling you. That is often the litmus test I know myself. Whether or not, like if I am always just, I don't know, surfing the web for no reason. I'm just, I'm bored. it's controlling me. I'm not controlling it. If I'm reaching for my cell phone at every single moment, it's controlling me. I'm not controlling it. So in the Torah, let's do one of these texts from the Rebbe at the way end. Let's do 146, 12b. Let's begin with this one. And the Rebbe was talking about the importance of not profaning Shabbat, not just on Shabbat, throughout the entire week. Where are we up to? Barbara, we're reading 12b, page 146. And it is here.
And it is here where a Jew must be cautioned, being that he is essentially in a state of Shabbat. He must ensure to not profane the Shabbat, dragging the mundane matters into sanctity.
He's going to explain, yeah.
In personal terms, the soul descends down into this world where the conduct involves engaging in the 39 labors, plowing, sowing, down to the last detail of finishing the vessel. It is here that we must be careful that it should not encroach upon our Shabbat. It is true that he must indeed plow and sow to be able to procure bread and sustain himself, but it must be in the manner of, you shall eat the toil of your hands.
It's a verse. You eat by the toil of your hands. The Rebbe continues.
He should indeed exert his physical limbs, but not his head. This means to say that he should not lose focus and drag his soul into the material matters, the matters pertaining to his life.
The Rebbe is not suggesting you don't think at work. That's not what the Rebbe is saying. All jobs require thinking. But what the Rebbe is suggesting is that even when you're putting yourself fully, there's always a place of you that's a little above it. You're not consumed. You're not fully identifying it. You're always above it, and therefore you can ask, why am I doing it? Because the moment it is you completely, you have no way to elevate it anymore. I think that's one of the reasons some people have a hard time resting on Shabbat. They've identified with themselves so strongly. They've identified with, when you ask them, who am I? What is the answer they give? What they do, and therefore they can't stop that because they feel horrible if they stop that because they no longer have an identity. So what the Rebbe is suggesting here is you have to have a place inside of you all week long that is Shabbat, that is not fully, and he continues, people will ask, I need to support myself. Of course I have to throw myself into it. Keep on reading, 148.
People counter, but I need to support myself. However, Scripture states, nor do the wise have bread. One can get ingenious and come up with all sorts of schemes to earn another dollar, but this is not the method to draw down the blessing of God. God's blessing comes only through a pure medium, a medium that is sanctioned by the Torah.
In other words, people will do things that are unethical throughout the course of the week. And they're too consumed in what they do to the fact that they are relying now on methods that are not a pure vessel, as the Rebbe says. So that is because the Shabbat has not trickled down into the week. So the Rebbe says, of course you have to use an intellect for business. Of course you have to be fully engaged, but there has to be a part of us that is above it, and only then can we elevate it properly. We'll hold it over here. Any questions?
Yeah, it seems that Shabbat then is a lot of spiritual work. It's not physical work, but it's spiritual, so that you're prepared. So it's not just rest, meaning turn yourself off for the day.
Correct.
It's prepare yourself spiritually.
I would say the turning off for the day is only the shamor, right? Turning off is the shamor, but then it's how can I regain focus, spiritual focus, on what I do for the rest of the week.
So if you just do the resting, you're not really honoring the Shabbat then. If you're saying, oh, the day where I can do nothing.
Exactly. Very good point. Okay. Shabbat is not just a day of nothingness, though that is an important first step. You need to have a little bit of nothingness in order to afterwards be able to take the next
That's
one.
good. I'd never sort of heard it that way or saw it that way. So it's,
correct.
That's very nice.
Yeah. All right.
Is Herschel
Walker, yeah, he's not playing anymore.
Abraham Herschel okay to mention?
Sure.
His book, The Shabbos, is so good. It's short. It's just an amazing little book.
Yeah. And I like this idea because it helps us, like, why are we doing Shabbat, right? One is we need to wind down and stop, but two is we need to prepare for the following week and regain focus on the why of life. And that takes more time with community. That takes more time with family. That takes more time with God. But it's not just supposed to be an island. It's supposed to be an island that connects to the rest of the week. They're supposed to be bridges, I guess, in a sense. Maybe, just maybe, that's why there is a ritual connecting Shabbat to the rest of the week called Havdalah. It's an odd thing. Shabbat is over. Like, why do we have to have a ritual when Shabbat is over? Shabbat is over.
Well, it's a transition.
Okay, right. But there's supposed to be the transition of, another cup of wine. That's interesting. The cup of wine is how we begin it. You're saying it's like the Olympic torch that has the ceremony at the beginning and the ceremony at the end.
When you're leaving Shabbat into the mundane,
right?
I think we need a formal transition.
Right. Get back to work.
Get back to work, and then hopefully bring something with us. And there's a beautiful idea that the definition of anything holy and spiritual is when it can connect afterwards to the mundane. All right, we will hold it here.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Parent Dome with Ryan Miller, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.